What's up, everyone? Before we start, I need to be clear about something. This video is about human irrationality, and that includes me, includes you, includes everyone watching. When I talk about human stupidity, I'm not talking about stupid people versus smart people. I'm talking about the predictable, universal patterns of irrational thinking that all humans exhibit regardless of intelligence, education, or awareness. Machiavelli's darkest theory wasn't about some humans being stupid. It was about all humans being predictably irrational in specific ways. The question isn't whether you exhibit these patterns. You do, I do, everyone does. The question is whether you're aware enough to catch yourself when you're falling into them, and whether you understand these patterns well enough to defend yourself when others exploit them. Today, I'm breaking down 10 ruthless truths about human irrationality that Machiavelli identified 500 years ago. These observations are uncomfortable because they challenge our belief that we're rational, independent thinkers making free choices. We're not. We're pattern-following, emotionally driven, cognitively biased creatures who think we're rational while acting almost entirely on psychological programming. Understanding this isn't about judging others. It's about two things. First, recognizing your own irrational patterns so you can make better decisions. Second, defending yourself against people who understand these patterns and use them to manipulate. Every single day, marketers, politicians, manipulators, and con artists are exploiting these truths about human irrationality. The only defense is understanding the game being played. Let's get into Machiavelli's darkest observations about human nature. Machiavelli's reputation as cynical comes from one thing. He was willing to observe and describe human nature as it actually is, not as we wish it were. While other philosophers wrote about human potential, nobility, and rationality, Machiavelli watched actual humans in actual situations and wrote down what they really did. His darkest theory, never stated explicitly as one thesis but woven throughout his work, is this: human beings are governed primarily by irrational psychological patterns, and these patterns are so consistent and predictable that anyone who understands them has devastating power over those who do not. He observed that humans consistently make decisions based on emotion while believing they're being rational. They follow predictable psychological patterns while believing they're thinking independently. They respond to the same triggers and manipulations while believing they're too smart to be manipulated. This isn't about intelligence. Highly intelligent people fall for the same irrational patterns as everyone else, sometimes even more reliably because their intelligence makes them overconfident in their rationality. Machiavelli's genius was recognizing that human irrationality is not a bug to be fixed. It's the operating system. And once you understand the operating system, you can predict behavior with disturbing accuracy. The 10 truths we're covering today are drawn from observations scattered throughout the Prince, the Discourses, and his other works. Each one identifies a specific pattern of human irrationality that Machiavelli observed, explained why this pattern exists psychologically, and recognized how this pattern gets exploited. These aren't theories, they're observations confirmed by 500 years of human behavior since he wrote them. They're as true today as they were in Renaissance Italy because human psychology hasn't changed. The technology changed. The psychology didn't. Understanding these truths won't make you immune to irrational thinking. Nothing can. But it will make you aware enough to catch yourself sometimes, and defended enough to recognize manipulation attempts most of the time. That's the best anyone can do. Ruthless truth number 1. Most people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Machiavelli wrote, "Men are so simple, and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions." Here's what he observed. When presented with a comfortable lie and an uncomfortable truth, most humans will choose the lie. Not because they can't recognize truth, because truth threatens their worldview, identity, or emotional comfort, and humans prioritize psychological comfort over accuracy. This is why con artists, cult leaders, and manipulative politicians are so successful. They're not succeeding because people are too dumb to see through them. They succeed because people want to believe the comfortable narrative being offered, even when part of them knows it's probably false. The psychological mechanism. Humans have enormous emotional investment in their existing beliefs and worldview. Uncomfortable truths require admitting you were wrong, changing your behavior, or accepting scary realities. Comfortable lies let you maintain your current beliefs and avoid difficult changes. The brain will choose comfort over accuracy almost every time. How this gets exploited. Watch any successful demagogue, con artist, or manipulative partner. They don't offer you reality. They offer you what you want reality to be. You're not the problem. They are. You deserve more than you're getting. There's an easy solution if only people would listen. These narratives succeed because they're emotionally satisfying, not because they're true. You exhibit this pattern when you ignore early warning signs in relationships because you want to believe it'll work out. You reject information that contradicts your political beliefs. You buy products that promise easy solutions to hard problems. You avoid medical tests because you'd rather not know. We all do this constantly. Defense mechanism. When something feels really good to believe, that's exactly when you need to examine it most critically. Comfort in belief is a red flag, not validation. Ask yourself, am I believing this because evidence supports it, or because believing it makes me feel better? The answer is uncomfortable more often than you'd like. Ruthless truth. Number 2. People judge by appearance, not reality. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." His observation: humans are terrible at distinguishing substance from presentation. We judge competence by confidence, intelligence by vocabulary, and trustworthiness by likability. This means impressive packaging defeats superior content almost every time. This is why mediocre people with excellent presentation skills rise higher than brilliant people with poor social skills. Why confident incompetence beats anxious expertise. Why style defeats substance in almost every competitive domain. It's not fair. It's just how human perception works. The psychological mechanism. Our brains use shortcuts to evaluate complex things quickly. Instead of doing the hard work of assessing actual competence or character, we use proxies: confidence, appearance, speaking style, social proof. These proxies are easy to fake, which is exactly why they're unreliable. But our brains keep using them because doing actual assessment is cognitively expensive. How this gets exploited. Every con artist, fake guru, and corporate climber understands this. They invest in appearance. Expensive clothes, confident body language, impressive vocabulary, social proof. They know most people will judge the packaging instead of examining the content. And they're right. Look at any influencer selling courses they're not qualified to teach. It works because they look successful, not because they have results. You exhibit this pattern when you judge job candidates more by their interview performance than their work samples. You trust people more because they're attractive or well-dressed. You buy from companies with slick marketing instead of verified track records. You follow advice from confident speakers instead of verified experts. We all do this. Defense mechanism. Consciously separate presentation from substance. When evaluating anything important, people, products, ideas, force yourself to ignore how it's presented and assess what is actually being offered. Ask for evidence, track records, and verifiable results. Don't let confidence substitute for competence. This requires conscious effort because your brain's default is judging by appearance. Ruthless truth. Number 3. Humans are terrible at assessing risk. Machiavelli observed that people fear the wrong things. They're terrified of statistically insignificant threats while ignoring patterns that are actually likely to harm them. This cognitive blindness makes humans easy to control through manufactured fear. The pattern: humans fear dramatic, unlikely threats, terrorism, plane crashes, stranger danger, while ignoring mundane likely threats, heart disease from bad diet, financial ruin from poor planning, relationship damage from neglect. We fear what's vivid and emotional, not what's actually probable. The psychological mechanism. Our risk assessment evolved for ancestral environments with immediate physical threats. We're wired to respond to dramatic, sudden dangers. We're not wired to assess statistical probability or long-term accumulated risk. This means our fear response is completely uncalibrated for modern risks. Availability bias makes recent or dramatic events seem more likely. A plane crash on the news makes us fear flying despite it being statistically safer than the drive to the airport. How this gets exploited. Politicians use fear of unlikely threats to gain power. Marketers use manufactured anxiety to sell products. Media companies use fear to drive engagement. They're all exploiting your miscalibrated threat assessment. Fear of terrorism gets used to justify massive policy changes despite it being a statistically tiny risk. Fear of looking foolish prevents people from pursuing opportunities. Fear of judgment keeps people trapped in mediocrity. Meanwhile, the actual high-probability risks, chronic stress, sedentary lifestyle, poor relationships, financial unpreparedness, get ignored because they're not emotionally dramatic. You exhibit this pattern when you worry about unlikely disasters while ignoring likely problems. You let fear of embarrassment prevent you from taking beneficial risks. You make decisions to avoid emotionally salient threats instead of statistically likely ones. You let news-driven fear shape your worldview despite statistics showing the world getting safer. Defense mechanism. When you feel afraid, stop and ask, what is the actual probability of this threat versus how afraid I feel? Your emotional response and actual risk rarely correlate. Learn to make decisions based on probability and impact, not emotional intensity. This is hard because it requires overriding your instinctive threat response. Ruthless. Truth number 4. Most people ain't think more than one move ahead. Machiavelli observed that most humans think reactively and short term. They respond to immediate situations without considering second and third-order consequences. This makes them predictable and easy to outmaneuver for anyone who thinks strategically. The pattern. Someone treats you badly, you retaliate immediately, making the situation worse. Someone offers immediate gratification, you take it despite obvious long-term costs. Someone pushes your buttons, you react exactly as they predicted. Humans are predominantly reactive thinkers responding to immediate stimuli, not strategic thinkers considering cascading consequences. The psychological mechanism. Strategic thinking requires holding multiple future scenarios in mind simultaneously and evaluating second and third-order effects. This is cognitively demanding. Reactive thinking, responding to what's directly in front of you, is cognitively cheap. Under stress, time pressure, or emotional activation, humans default to reactive thinking almost universally. How this gets exploited. Watch any skilled manipulator. They create situations where your immediate reactive response serves their longer-term strategy. They provoke you into reactions that hurt you more than them. They offer immediate gratification with hidden long-term costs. They think 3 moves ahead while you're thinking 1 move ahead, so they win consistently. In business, companies offer low intro prices knowing you won't cancel when rates increase. In relationships, manipulators create drama, knowing you'll react emotionally instead of strategically. In politics, opponents bait you into responses that make you look bad while they look composed. You exhibit this pattern when you send that angry email without considering consequences. You make impulse purchases. You react to provocations instead of considering if the reaction serves you. You focus on immediate problems without asking, and then what happens? We all do this constantly. Defense mechanism. Before any significant action, force yourself to think 2 moves ahead. If I do this, what will they likely do? And if they do that, where does it leave me? Most bad decisions look okay if you think 1 move ahead. They only reveal themselves as bad when you think 2 or 3 moves ahead. This requires pausing reactive impulses and engaging strategic thinking. Hard, but trainable. Ruthless truth. Number 5. People believe what they want to believe. Machiavelli observed what modern psychology calls confirmation bias. Humans don't objectively evaluate evidence and then form beliefs. They form beliefs based on emotion, identity, or desire, then selectively accept evidence that confirms those beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence. This makes manipulation trivially easy. Just tell people what they already want to believe. The pattern. Someone wants to believe they're in a good relationship, so they interpret every ambiguous action charitably while dismissing red flags. Someone wants to believe their political tribe is right, so they accept weak evidence for their side while demanding impossible standards of proof for the other side. Someone wants to believe an investment will pay off, so they focus on optimistic scenarios while ignoring risk factors. The psychological mechanism. Beliefs are tied to identity, emotion, and tribal affiliation. Changing beliefs is psychologically painful. It requires admitting you were wrong, potentially changing behavior, maybe even changing social groups. The brain resists this pain by filtering information. You unconsciously notice and remember belief-confirming information while filtering out belief-challenging information. You don't even see contradictory evidence consciously most of the time. How this gets exploited. Anyone selling anything learns to identify what their target audience wants to believe, then frame their message to confirm that existing belief. Political movements don't convince people with evidence. They provide confirming narratives for existing beliefs. Cults don't convert people with logic. They attract people who want to believe what the cult teaches. Con artists don't trick you into new beliefs. They exploit beliefs you already hold. You exhibit this pattern when you seek information that confirms your political views while dismissing contradictory sources as biased. You interpret relationship red flags as quirks because you want the relationship to work. You believe in get-rich-quick schemes that match what you want reality to be. You accept weak evidence for beliefs you like while demanding perfect proof for beliefs you don't like. Everyone does this constantly. Defense mechanism. Actively seek information that contradicts your beliefs. When you find yourself really wanting something to be true, that's exactly when you need to examine evidence most skeptically. Ask yourself, if I wanted to prove myself wrong, what evidence would I need to accept? Most people never ask this question. Ruthless truth. Number 6. Humans mistake repetition for truth. Machiavelli understood what modern propaganda exploits. Humans have a cognitive quirk where repeated messages feel more true than new messages, regardless of evidence. Simply repeating something makes people believe it. This is called the illusory truth effect, and it's one of the most reliably exploitable patterns in human cognition. The pattern. Hear something once, you question it. Hear it 10 times, it starts feeling true. Hear it 100 times, it feels obviously true even if you've never seen evidence. Advertising works this way. Political propaganda works this way. Cultural narratives work this way. Repetition creates familiarity, and humans mistake familiarity for truth. The psychological mechanism. Processing fluency. Things we've heard before are easier for our brains to process, and we interpret that ease of processing as a signal of truth. Your brain thinks, this feels familiar and easy to understand, therefore it's probably true. This made sense in ancestral environments where repeatedly encountered information was likely to be reliable. But in modern information environments where repetition is artificially manufactured, this hardwired response makes us vulnerable to manipulation. How this gets exploited. Every propagandist, marketer, and cult leader understands this. They repeat their message relentlessly through multiple channels, not because people didn't understand the first time, because repetition itself makes the message feel true. Political slogans get repeated until they feel like obvious facts. Brand messages get repeated until you trust the brand. False narratives get repeated until they become common knowledge. No evidence required, just repetition. You exhibit this pattern when you believe things are true because you've heard them multiple times without ever checking sources. You trust brands you've seen advertised repeatedly despite knowing nothing about their quality. You accept political narratives as fact because everyone in your information bubble repeats them. You think things are common knowledge when they're actually just commonly repeated. Defense mechanism. When something feels obviously true, ask yourself, do I believe this because I've seen evidence or just because I've heard it repeatedly? Separate the feeling of familiarity from actual evidence of truth. Most beliefs that feel obvious to you feel obvious because of repetition, not because of evidence you've personally verified. Ruthless truth. Number 7. People follow crowds mindlessly. Machiavelli observed that humans are herd animals. We look to others to determine correct behavior, beliefs, and decisions. This made sense evolutionarily. Following the tribe kept you safe. But in modern contexts, it means most humans outsource their thinking to crowds, making independent thought rare enough to be a massive advantage. The pattern. Watch people's behavior change completely based on what they think others around them believe. Someone holds opinion A until they think the crowd believes B, then suddenly they believe B too. Not because of new evidence, because herding instinct overpowers individual judgment. Fashion works this way. Political movements work this way. Market bubbles work this way. Humans follow crowds even when the crowd is obviously wrong, even when following leads to harm. The psychological mechanism. Social proof and conformity bias. We use others' behavior as a shortcut for determining correct action. When uncertain, we look around and do what everyone else is doing. And this usually works because crowds often are right, but it breaks down when crowds are wrong, panicking, or being manipulated. And once you're in the herd, contradicting it creates anxiety. You feel the discomfort of being socially deviant even when you're correct. How this gets exploited. Manipulators create the appearance of consensus to trigger herd following. Everyone's doing this. This is what successful people believe. You're the only one who questions this. They manufacture social proof to make their preferred action look like what the herd is doing, knowing most humans will follow without independent evaluation. Marketers use bestseller labels. Politicians claim everyone knows. Scammers create fake testimonials, all exploiting herd instinct. You exhibit this pattern when you adopt beliefs because people around you hold them. You buy things because they're popular. You stay silent when the crowd believes something you think is wrong. You change your opinion based on social pressure rather than evidence. We all do this constantly. Defense mechanism. When you feel pressure to agree with the crowd, that's exactly when you need to evaluate independently. Ask, if I were the only person on Earth, would I still believe this? Or am I believing it because of social pressure? Independent thought requires consciously resisting herd instinct, which feels uncomfortable. Most people never do it. Ruthless truth. Number 8. Humans are governed by fear more than hope. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." He observed that humans respond more reliably to fear-based motivation than hope-based motivation. Fear drives action more consistently than aspiration. This is why fear-based manipulation works so reliably. It's hacking the more powerful motivational system. The pattern. People will work harder to avoid loss than to pursue equivalent gain. They'll respond more urgently to threats than to opportunities. They'll change behavior faster when afraid than when hopeful. Fear activates the primitive brain regions that override rational planning. Hope activates newer brain regions that can be rationalized away. The psychological mechanism: loss aversion and negativity bias. From evolutionary perspective, failing to respond to threats killed you immediately, while failing to pursue opportunities just meant missing out. So we're wired to weigh threats more heavily than opportunities, to remember negative information more than positive, to react more urgently to fear than hope. This kept ancestors alive but makes modern humans easy to control through manufactured fear. How this gets exploited. Every power structure runs on fear more than hope. Politicians use fear of threats to gain power. Employers use fear of unemployment to extract compliance. Manipulators use fear of abandonment to control partners. Marketers use fear of missing out, fear of looking foolish, fear of inadequacy to sell products. Not because these fears are proportional to reality, because fear works. Watch any effective fear campaign. It doesn't need evidence. It just needs to activate the fear response, and humans respond predictably. You exhibit this pattern when you stay in bad situations because you're more afraid of change than unhappy with the present. You make decisions to avoid feared outcomes instead of pursuing desired outcomes. You respond to fear-based messages while dismissing hope-based ones as naive. You let fear-mongering news shape your worldview. We all prioritize fear over hope constantly. Defense mechanism. When you feel fear driving your decisions, stop and assess. Is this fear proportional to actual probability and impact? Or is my fear response being manipulated? Most of your fear-driven behavior is responding to manufactured or exaggerated threats. Learn to discount fear-based messages until you've independently verified the actual risk. This is hard because fear overrides. Rational assessment. Ruthless. Truth number 9. Most people never learn from experience. This is perhaps Machiavelli's most disturbing observation. Humans repeat the same mistakes indefinitely despite clear negative feedback. We date the same toxic personality type repeatedly. We make the same financial mistakes. We fall for the same manipulation tactics. Experience doesn't teach most people because they don't actually process experience. They rationalize it to preserve existing beliefs. The pattern. Someone gets burned in relationship with narcissist. Swears they'll never do it again. 6 months later, dating another narcissist. Someone loses money on get-rich-quick scheme. Says they've learned. Falls for next scheme that looks slightly different. Someone gets manipulated by a specific tactic. Recognizes it happened. Falls for the same tactic from different person. The cycle repeats because people don't actually learn from experience. The psychological mechanism. Learning from experience requires acknowledging you made a mistake, understanding what led to the mistake, and changing your behavior patterns. But this is psychologically painful. Easier to blame external circumstances, rationalize the mistake as unavoidable, or simply forget it happened. Your ego protects itself by preventing actual learning. So, most people repeat patterns indefinitely while believing they're learning. How this gets exploited. Anyone running a repeated scam knows this. They do not need to worry about their victims warning others or learning to avoid the scam, because humans don't actually learn from being scammed. They rationalize it, move on, and fall for similar scams repeatedly. Abusive partners know their victims will often return or find similar partners. Con artists know marks will fall for variations of the same con. Manipulative bosses know employees will tolerate the same mistreatment indefinitely. Not because people are stupid, because genuine learning from experience requires painful self-examination that most humans avoid. You exhibit this pattern when you keep dating the same personality type despite bad outcomes. You make the same financial mistakes repeatedly. You fall for the same manipulation tactics from different people. You keep trusting people who've proven untrustworthy. You repeat patterns your parents demonstrated despite swearing you'd be different. We all do this in multiple areas. Defense mechanism. After any significant negative experience, force yourself to do painful post-mortem analysis. What pattern led to this? What did I ignore? What will I do differently? Write it down. Most people skip this because it's uncomfortable. Without it, you're guaranteed to repeat the pattern. Genuine learning requires acknowledging your role in negative outcomes, not just blaming circumstances or others. Ruthless truth. Number 10. People overestimate their own rationality. This is the meta-truth that makes all others work. Humans consistently believe they're more rational, less biased, and less manipulable than average. This bias blind spot means even when you're aware of cognitive biases intellectually, you don't believe they apply to you personally. This makes every other irrationality more effective. Machiavelli observed this most dangerous pattern. People most vulnerable to manipulation are often those most confident they're immune to it. The pattern. Everyone thinks others are irrational, biased, and manipulated, but each individual believes they are the rational exception. Ask people if humans are generally rational. They'll say no. Ask if they personally are rational. They'll say yes. This contradiction doesn't register. Someone watches this entire video nodding along thinking, yes, other people do all this, while not recognizing they exhibit every single pattern. The psychological mechanism. Your brain has access to your reasoning process but not others, so your decisions feel reasoned while others look biased. Your thoughts happen in real time with full context, so they feel logical. Others' behavior you only see as outputs, so it looks irrational. This creates fundamental asymmetry, where you always seem more rational to yourself than others do, even when exhibiting identical behaviors. How this gets exploited. Manipulators don't target people who think they're manipulable. Those people are defended. They target people who think they're too smart to be manipulated. Those people let their guard down. I'm educated, I can't be scammed. I'm too logical to fall for propaganda. I'm too experienced to be manipulated in relationships. These beliefs make you more vulnerable, not less, because you stop watching for manipulation attempts. You exhibit this pattern when you think propaganda only affects others, not you. You believe you're less biased than average. You think you can't be manipulated because you're too smart. You recognize irrationality in others but not yourself. Right now, reading this, thinking, I don't do that, that thought is the pattern. Defense mechanism. Assume you're exhibiting all these patterns all the time. Not because you're stupid, because you're human. The question isn't, am I rational? You're not. Nobody is. The question is, can I catch myself in the act of being irrational often enough to mitigate damage? Start with the assumption that you're biased, manipulable, and irrational. Work backwards from there to defend yourself. The person who thinks they're immune is the easiest target. Here's the uncomfortable reality we need to address directly. Every single one of these patterns, all 10, are operating in you right now as you watch this. Not might be, are. You prefer comfortable lies in some areas of life. You judge by appearance more than substance. You assess risk emotionally, not statistically. You think reactively more than strategically. You believe what you want to believe. You mistake repetition for truth. You follow crowds. You're governed by fear. You repeat mistakes. And you think you're more rational than you actually are. This isn't an insult. It's describing how human brains work. Mine included. I exhibit all these patterns too. The difference between being vulnerable and being somewhat defended isn't eliminating these patterns. You can't. It's catching yourself in the act often enough to limit damage. Machiavelli's darkest theory wasn't that some humans are stupid and others are smart. It was that all humans are predictably irrational in these specific ways, and the game of power is played between those who understand this reality and those who don't. Understanding doesn't make you immune, but not understanding guarantees you'll be exploited by someone who does. The question isn't whether you're subject to these patterns. You are. The question is, will you examine yourself honestly enough to catch some of them? Or will you do what most people do? Agree these patterns exist in others while denying they apply to you. That denial is truth literature 10 in action. If you're doing it right now, you just proved the point. The path to being less manipulable isn't believing you're rational. It's accepting you're irrational and watching for these specific patterns in your own thinking and behavior. So, what do you actually do with this information? 3 things. First, use it for self-examination. When making important decisions, check yourself against these 10 patterns. Am I believing this because it's comfortable? Am I judging by appearance? Is fear driving this? Am I thinking past the immediate reaction? Am I believing what I want to believe? You won't catch every instance, but catching some is better than catching none. Second, use it defensively. When someone is trying to influence you, marketer, politician, potential partner, boss, friend, ask which of these patterns they're attempting to exploit. Are they offering comfortable lies? Creating appearance of competence without substance? Using fear? Exploiting herd instinct? Recognizing the tactic doesn't make you immune, but it helps you resist. Third, don't use it to exploit others. These patterns are real and manipulable. You could use this knowledge to manipulate people more effectively. Don't. The information is for defense and self-awareness, not offense. Machiavelli described these patterns because they exist and are being exploited. Pretending they don't exist doesn't protect you. Understanding them gives you a chance at defense and better self-awareness. That's the ethical use of this knowledge. Anything else is just becoming the manipulator you're trying to defend against. If this video made you uncomfortable by showing patterns you recognize in yourself, that's the entire point. Comfort is the enemy of awareness. Hit that like button if you're ready to examine your own irrationality instead of just judging others. Share this with someone who needs to understand these patterns, either for self-awareness or defense. Subscribe because we're going deep into Machiavellian psychology and uncomfortable truths about human nature that most channels won't touch. Drop a comment answering honestly. Which of these 10 patterns do you catch yourself exhibiting most often? And, more importantly, which one are you most tempted to deny applies to you? That second question might be more revealing than the first. If you want me to do a follow-up on how to defend against each of these patterns specifically, or how to catch yourself exhibiting them, let me know in comments. Here's your homework. For the next week, watch for one of these patterns in your own thinking and behavior, not in others, in yourself. When you catch it, just notice it. You don't have to fix it, just see it. That awareness is the first step toward being less manipulable and making better decisions. Remember, understanding human irrationality doesn't make you superior to others. It makes you slightly less blind to your own irrationality. That's the best anyone can achieve. I'll see you in the next video.